Welcome to this unit where we will discuss performance measurement and evaluation. Understandably, for the purposes of continuous improvement over time, performance measurement and evaluation acts as one of the seminal points in supplier relationship management. In this unit, we are going to examine how organizations measure and evaluate performance in purchasing and supply chain management. By the end of this unit, you should be able to create a purchasing and supply chain measurement framework, understand key performance metrics used in supply management, explain the role of benchmarking, and identify the characteristics of effective performance measurement systems. Performance measurement is important because supply management decisions influence costs, operational performance, supplier relationships, and ultimately the competitive position of the firm. Understanding how to measure these outcomes allows organizations to improve both operational and strategic decision-making. Before discussing specific metrics, we first need to understand two fundamental concepts: effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness refers to the extent to which management achieves previously established goals or standards. In other words, did the organization accomplish what it intended to accomplish? Efficiency, on the other hand, focuses on the relationship between resources used and results achieved. Efficiency evaluates how well inputs such as labor, materials, and time are converted into outputs. Most performance measurement systems try to evaluate both effectiveness and efficiency. A company may be effective in reaching its goals, but inefficient in how it uses resources. Ideally, organizations strive to be both effective and efficient. Organizations measure performance for several important reasons. First, measurement allows companies to evaluate how purchasing and supply chain activities contribute to overall competitive performance. Supply management must support broader company goals such as cost leadership, responsiveness, or innovation. Second, measurement improves decision-making. When performance data is visible and measurable, managers can identify problems and opportunities more quickly. Third, performance measurement improves communication. It allows better coordination, both within the purchasing department and across supply chain partners. Measurement also provides feedback that helps prevent problems or correct them quickly. Finally, measurement motivates behavior. When organizations measure certain outcomes, they signal that these outcomes are important. In many cases, performance results are also tied to rewards and incentives. Despite its importance, performance measurement can create several challenges. Organizations sometimes collect too much data, or the wrong type of data. When this happens, managers become overwhelmed and may focus on metrics that do not actually improve performance. Another problem is that many metrics focus only on short-term outcomes, such as price reductions, while ignoring long-term strategic value. Sometimes measures lack sufficient detail, making them difficult to interpret. In other cases, metrics unintentionally drive the wrong behavior. For example, if buyers are evaluated only on cost reduction, they may select suppliers that are cheaper but less reliable. Finally, some measurement systems focus on behaviors rather than actual accomplishments. Effective measurement should emphasize results rather than activity. To overcome these challenges, organizations must clearly understand how purchasing and supply management contribute to company success. Managers must agree on which performance measures truly reflect organizational priorities. Companies also need effective information systems that provide accurate, timely, and accessible data. Without reliable data, even well-designed performance measurement systems will fail. Supply chain performance can be evaluated across several categories. These categories can include price performance, cost effectiveness, revenue and economic value-added measures, quality, delivery responsiveness, technology and innovation, environmental sustainability, asset management, administrative efficiency, social responsibility, internal customer satisfaction, supplier risk, and strategic performance. Each category captures a different dimension of supply chain contribution. Together, they create a comprehensive view of performance. Many organizations use an integrated company-wide measurement process. This process links purchasing performance to broader organizational objectives and ensures that supply management supports company strategy. Instead of measuring purchasing in isolation, the system integrates supply management metrics with financial, operational, and strategic goals across the firm. One of the most traditional measurement categories in purchasing is price performance. Organizations often evaluate price performance by comparing actual prices paid to planned prices, comparing prices against market indices, examining price differences across operating units, and measuring whether target prices were achieved. These comparisons help determine whether purchasing professionals are securing competitive prices for the organization. A common price metric is purchase price variance. This measures the difference between the actual price paid and the planned or expected price. Companies often calculate both the absolute variance and the percentage variance. Managers may also evaluate the total financial impact of price variance by multiplying the difference between planned and actual price by the purchase volume. Performance can be reported by item, commodity group, product, project, location, buyer, or supplier. Another approach compares the price paid by the firm with general market pricing. This approach works best for standardized products whose prices are largely determined by supply and demand. Organizations often use published price indices, such as the Producer Price Index, to track market price trends and compare them with the firm's actual purchasing prices. Companies may also compare prices paid by different plants, divisions, or business units. These comparisons help identify opportunities to leverage purchasing volume or standardize purchasing practices across the organization. If one unit consistently pays higher prices for the same item, managers can investigate why and potentially improve purchasing performance. Another approach is target pricing. Target pricing starts by determining what customers are willing to pay for a product. From that price, the firm subtracts the desired profit to determine the allowable cost. Supply management then works with engineering and suppliers to ensure that components and materials meet those cost targets. Cost-effectiveness measures focus on cost reduction and cost avoidance. Cost reduction measures the change in cost resulting from a new purchasing strategy, such as negotiating a lower price or switching suppliers. Cost avoidance refers to situations where purchasing actions prevent costs from increasing. While cost avoidance can demonstrate value, it often requires manual calculation and may be more subjective than cost reduction measures. Purchasing can also influence company revenues and innovation. Examples include royalties generated from supplier-developed technology, supplier contributions that help win new business, and revenue from licensed technologies. Some firms also track patents, invention disclosures, and other innovation indicators connected to supplier collaboration. Economic value added, or EVA, measures a company's financial performance based on residual wealth. It is calculated as net operating profit after taxes minus the cost of capital tied up in assets. The goal is to generate returns greater than the minimum expected return required by investors. Effective supply management can increase EVA through productivity improvements, cost reductions, and innovation. Quality performance is often measured through indicators such as defects per million parts, customer defect rates associated with specific suppliers, and field failure rates. These measures help organizations evaluate supplier quality and identify areas for improvement. Time-related metrics focus on speed and responsiveness. Examples include time to market for new products, on-time delivery rates, cycle time reductions, and responsiveness to schedule or design changes. These metrics are especially important in industries where speed and flexibility are key competitive advantages. Now let's turn to technology and innovation measures that organizations use to evaluate how effectively they collaborate with suppliers and incorporate new technological developments. The first measure focuses on the first insight or production outputs of supplier technology. This refers to the time period before a new technological development created by a supplier is shared with other organizations. In other words, firms often benefit when they gain early access to a supplier's technological innovations. The shorter the delay before the firm receives this knowledge, the greater the potential competitive advantage. The second measure looks at new innovations incorporated into products or services. Here, organizations examine the rate at which innovations obtained from suppliers are actually integrated into their offerings. This metric reflects how effectively a firm leverages supplier knowledge and technological capabilities to improve its own products, services, or operational processes. The third measure involves standardization and the use of industry standards to reduce complexity. Companies often evaluate whether they are reducing redundancy and minimizing the number of unique or customized components used in new products and services. By adopting widely accepted industry standards, firms can simplify production, improve compatibility across systems, and reduce development costs. Next, let's talk about environmental sustainability measures and how organizations incorporate sustainability considerations into supply chain and procurement decisions. The first measure involves the use of sustainability criteria in procurement decisions. This means that when firms select suppliers or evaluate purchasing options, they do not focus solely on cost, quality, and delivery. Instead, they also consider environmental impact, ethical practices, and broader sustainability performance. The second measure focuses on embedding sustainability and social responsibility into organizational processes. This includes integrating sustainability into supplier qualification and certification decisions, as well as incorporating sustainability considerations into product design, redesign efforts, and statements of work. In other words, sustainability becomes part of how the organization plans and executes its operations. A third measure involves developing processes and internal knowledge that help employees understand sourcing practices, recycling requirements, and environmental considerations. Building this knowledge base ensures that sustainability principles are consistently applied throughout the organization. Organizations also work to develop strong relationships with key suppliers. These relationships can provide access to important information, such as the chemical composition of purchased products, which helps firms monitor environmental compliance and identify potential sustainability risks. Another important area is risk management. Companies must develop systems to identify, quantify, and evaluate risks associated with failing to meet sustainability and social responsibility standards. This allows firms to proactively address potential environmental or ethical issues within their supply chains. Finally, organizations must maintain accurate records and documentation related to sustainability initiatives. These records support corporate sustainability reporting and social responsibility disclosures, which are increasingly expected by regulators, investors, and other stakeholders. The asset and integrated supply chain measures metrics help organizations understand how efficiently they use physical resources and how well they coordinate activities across the supply chain. First, let's consider inventory measures. Inventory represents a major asset for most supply chains, so managing it effectively is critical. Organizations often track the dollar value of inventory to understand how much capital is tied up in stock. They also monitor inventory turnover, which indicates how quickly inventory is sold and replenished. Higher turnover typically signals more efficient inventory management. Another important metric is days, weeks, or months of supply, which measures how long current inventory levels can support demand without replenishment. Next are transportation cost reduction measures. Companies compare actual transportation costs to predetermined targets to assess efficiency. Additional metrics include demurrage and detention costs, which occur when shipments are delayed at ports or terminals. Firms also monitor premium transportation, such as expedited shipping, because frequent use of premium freight often signals planning or coordination problems in the supply chain. Another key performance area is customer order fulfillment. This focuses on how effectively an organization honors its commitments to customers. Metrics in this area evaluate whether orders are delivered on time, in full, and according to agreed service levels, which directly influences customer satisfaction and long-term relationships. On the integration side, many organizations track digital transaction metrics. These include the number and percentage of suppliers connected electronically, the percentage of orders processed digitally, and the use of advanced shipping notices or electronic funds transfers. Companies may also measure the number of e-reverse auctions or electronic quote packages, reflecting how extensively digital tools are used across the supply chain. Finally, we look at pull systems and supplier-managed inventory, often referred to as SMI. In these systems, suppliers share production schedules and coordinate closely with buyers. The goal is to synchronize supply and production with actual customer demand. Rather than producing goods in advance, production is triggered by real customer orders. This approach requires rapid communication and responsiveness from both purchasing and operations teams. Administration and efficiency measures help organizations evaluate how well their purchasing and supply management functions are operating. One common approach is budget-based measurement. Many organizations use a current budget plus adjustment method, where the purchasing budget begins with the current budget and is then adjusted based on expected business conditions such as projected sales, demand changes, or economic factors. Another approach involves the use of control ratios. Control ratios provide a way to link purchasing activity to the scale of operations within the organization. For example, firms may calculate a purchasing budget by multiplying estimated expenditures for direct materials by a control ratio. This helps organizations maintain consistency between purchasing costs and overall production activity. Organizations also track operational activity measures to evaluate administrative workload and productivity. These may include the number of purchase orders processed, the number of line items handled, and the headcount required to manage procurement activities. These indicators help managers understand how efficiently purchasing tasks are being performed. However, it is important to remember that supply management should not focus solely on efficiency. Increasingly, organizations emphasize effectiveness over efficiency. While efficiency looks at how quickly or cheaply activities are performed, effectiveness focuses on whether the purchasing function is actually supporting organizational goals such as securing reliable suppliers, managing risk, and contributing to long-term value creation. In addition to financial and operational metrics, organizations also track governmental and social measures within supply chain management. These measures focus on how procurement activities support broader social and policy objectives. One common area of focus is MWBE objectives, which stands for Minority, Women, and Small Business Enterprises. Many governments, public institutions, and large corporations establish goals to increase participation from these businesses in their supply chains. A key metric used to track this objective is the percentage of spend directed toward MWBE suppliers. This is calculated by dividing the annual dollars spent with MWBE suppliers by the total purchasing dollars, and then expressing that value as a percentage. This measure allows organizations to monitor how much of their procurement budget is supporting diverse and small businesses. Organizations may also track the number of suppliers within each MWBE category. This helps assess the diversity of the supplier base and whether the organization is building a broad network of qualified MWBE partners. Finally, firms often evaluate the growth of MWBE spending over time. Increasing spend in these categories indicates progress toward diversity and inclusion goals within the supply chain. Another important area of supply chain performance evaluation is safety measures, particularly those related to the safety of supplier employees. Organizations increasingly recognize that supply chain responsibility extends beyond their own facilities to include the working conditions of their suppliers. One key measure is the number of safety incidents occurring within supplier operations. Monitoring incident rates helps organizations identify suppliers that may be operating in unsafe environments or failing to meet acceptable labor and safety standards. This issue is especially important in emerging economies, where there has historically been greater concern about unsafe working conditions, poor labor protections, and inadequate safety oversight. Because of this, many companies now conduct audits, require safety certifications, or monitor safety performance as part of their supplier evaluation process. Safety performance can also have a direct impact on business relationships. Suppliers with strong safety records are often more attractive partners, while those with poor safety performance may lose contracts or be excluded from future sourcing opportunities. As a result, safety measures not only help protect workers across the supply chain, but they can also affect the awarding of new business, making safety an important component of responsible and sustainable supply chain management. Another important set of supply chain performance metrics focuses on internal customer satisfaction. These measures evaluate how well the purchasing and supply management function supports other departments within the organization. One key measure is the degree of satisfaction with purchasing and supplier value-added contributions. In other words, organizations assess whether internal stakeholders, such as operations, engineering, production, or marketing, believe the purchasing department is helping create value. This might include securing reliable suppliers, supporting product development, reducing costs, or improving delivery performance. A common way to measure this is through surveys of internal customers. Employees in other departments are asked to rate their satisfaction with purchasing's responsiveness, communication, supplier management, and overall contribution to organizational goals. These surveys also help organizations identify problem areas that may be restricting performance. For example, internal customers may report delays in sourcing, communication issues, or challenges working with certain suppliers. Finally, organizations may also try to understand how suppliers themselves view the buying company. Supplier feedback can reveal whether the company is seen as a collaborative and reliable partner, which can influence supplier commitment and performance. In addition to operational metrics, organizations also track supplier, risk, and strategic performance measures to ensure long-term supply chain effectiveness and resilience. First, companies evaluate supplier performance measures. The most common indicators focus on quality, cost, and delivery. Quality measures assess whether suppliers consistently meet product specifications and maintain low defect rates. Cost measures evaluate whether suppliers provide competitive pricing and help reduce overall procurement costs. Delivery performance focuses on whether suppliers deliver materials on time and in the correct quantities, which is critical for maintaining smooth production and service operations. Beyond traditional supplier metrics, organizations also pay increasing attention to risk measures. Modern supply chains are highly interconnected and exposed to a wide range of potential disruptions. One growing concern is cybersecurity risk, especially as supply chains become more digitally integrated. A cyber breach at a supplier can disrupt operations or expose sensitive information. Another important consideration is supplier financial risk. If a key supplier experiences financial distress or bankruptcy, it can threaten supply continuity. Companies also monitor logistics disruption risks, such as transportation delays, port congestion, or infrastructure failures that could interrupt the movement of goods. Finally, organizations assess supplier exposure to physical and political disasters, including natural disasters, geopolitical instability, or regulatory changes that could affect production or distribution. The final category we will discuss is strategic performance measures. These measures focus on how well the purchasing and supply management function supports the broader strategic goals of the organization. First, strategic performance measures must support overall corporate and functional objectives. Rather than focusing only on cost reductions or operational efficiency, supply management should contribute to the company's long-term success. This means prioritizing effectiveness over efficiency, ensuring that purchasing decisions help the organization achieve its strategic priorities, such as innovation, resilience, sustainability, or market growth. Second, organizations often use multiple strategic measures to evaluate performance. Some of these measures are activity-oriented, meaning they focus on the actions and processes carried out by the purchasing function. Others are results-oriented, meaning they evaluate the outcomes and value created by those activities. Together, these measures provide a more balanced view of performance. Finally, strategic performance measures reflect an important shift in the role of purchasing. Traditionally, purchasing was viewed primarily as an operational or tactical function focused on placing orders and controlling costs. Today, however, organizations increasingly expect purchasing to play a strategic role. This includes managing supplier relationships, supporting innovation, mitigating supply risks, and contributing to competitive advantage. To effectively manage supply chain performance, organizations need a structured performance measurement and evaluation system. This system helps firms track progress, identify improvement opportunities, and ensure that purchasing and supply management activities support broader organizational goals. The first step is to determine which performance categories should be measured. These categories can include price effectiveness, cost effectiveness, quality, time, technology, assets, efficiency, government and social performance, supplier performance, risk, and strategic performance, among others. Selecting the right categories ensures the measurement system captures the most important aspects of supply chain performance. Once the categories are identified, the next step is to develop specific performance measures. Effective measures should be objective, clear, and difficult to manipulate. They should also be dynamic, meaning they can adapt to changing business conditions, and practical, using data that is already available when possible. Most importantly, these measures should directly relate to purchasing and supply management objectives. After defining the measures, organizations must establish performance objectives. These targets can be based on historical performance data, internally derived comparisons across departments or time periods, or competitive benchmarking against other organizations or industry standards. The next stage is to finalize the system details. This includes determining how often performance will be reported, providing education and training for employees who will use the system, and ensuring that decision-makers understand how to interpret and apply the system's outputs. Finally, organizations implement and review the system. Often, companies begin with a pilot test to ensure the measures are useful and accurate. Over time, the system should be reviewed and updated as organizational priorities, technologies, and supply chain conditions evolve. Overall, developing a structured performance measurement system helps organizations align supply management activities with strategic goals while continuously improving supply chain performance. Another important tool used in supply chain performance evaluation is benchmarking. Benchmarking refers to the continuous measurement of a company's products, services, processes, and practices against those of leading organizations. The purpose of benchmarking is to identify performance gaps and opportunities for improvement. Companies typically compare themselves with their strongest competitors or with organizations that are recognized as industry or functional leaders. By examining how top-performing organizations operate, firms can identify best practices and adopt strategies that improve their own performance. There are several types of benchmarking that organizations may use. First is strategic benchmarking, which involves comparing overall business strategies with those of leading organizations. This helps firms understand how competitors position themselves in the market and what strategic approaches contribute to long-term success. Second is operational benchmarking, which focuses on the comparison of specific functional activities. For example, organizations might compare procurement processes, logistics operations, or supplier management practices to identify ways to improve efficiency or performance. Finally, there is support activity benchmarking, which focuses on controlling internal overhead and rising administrative costs. This type of benchmarking examines support functions to determine whether they are operating as efficiently and effectively as possible. Benchmarking helps organizations identify best practices, overcome resistance to change, gather market intelligence, and develop professional relationships with other organizations. These insights can significantly improve operational performance. Successful benchmarking requires organizational commitment. It must become an ongoing process rather than a temporary program. Companies must gather accurate data, learn from external organizations, and continuously improve their internal operations. Organizations often gather benchmarking data from trade journals, industry reports, conferences, internet research, suppliers, and trade associations. These sources provide valuable insights into industry practices and performance standards. Once an organization decides to use benchmarking, it typically follows a structured implementation process. This process helps ensure that benchmarking leads to meaningful insights and performance improvements. The first phase is planning. In this stage, organizations determine which products, processes, or functions should be benchmarked. They also identify appropriate benchmark targets, such as industry leaders or top competitors. Finally, the organization determines what data and information will be required to conduct the comparison. The second phase is analysis. During this stage, organizations evaluate how and why the benchmark target performs better. The goal is to identify best practices and determine how those practices might be incorporated into the company's own operations. This phase may also involve identifying future trends and expected performance levels. The third phase is integration. At this point, benchmarking findings are communicated to key personnel across the organization. Managers then use these insights to establish operational targets and functional goals that align with the lessons learned from the benchmarking analysis. The fourth phase is action. In this stage, organizations begin implementing the improvements identified through benchmarking. This includes assigning personnel responsible for carrying out action plans, developing a schedule for reviewing and updating goals, and creating systems to communicate benchmarking progress throughout the organization. The final phase is maturity. At this stage, benchmarking becomes an ongoing part of organizational practice rather than a one-time project. Companies continuously use benchmarking at multiple organizational levels and pursue ongoing performance improvement based on the insights gained through the benchmarking process. To conclude this unit, let's briefly review the main learning objectives and summarize the key ideas from each. First, we discussed how to create a purchasing and supply chain measurement framework. An effective framework organizes performance metrics across multiple categories, such as price performance, cost effectiveness, quality, delivery, innovation, sustainability, and supplier performance. The purpose of the framework is to ensure that purchasing and supply management activities align with broader organizational goals and contribute to overall competitive performance. Second, we reviewed key purchasing and supply chain measurements. These include traditional measures like purchase price variance, cost reduction, and inventory metrics, as well as broader indicators such as delivery reliability, supplier innovation, defect rates, and responsiveness. Together, these measures provide a more complete picture of how supply management contributes to operational efficiency and organizational effectiveness. Third, we examined benchmarking and its importance. Benchmarking involves comparing a company's processes, activities, and performance metrics with those of industry leaders or top competitors. By identifying best practices and performance gaps, benchmarking helps organizations improve processes, encourage innovation, and remain competitive. Finally, we identified the key characteristics of effective performance measurement systems. Effective systems focus on a limited number of clearly defined metrics, rely on accurate and reliable data, and link purchasing performance directly to corporate strategy. These systems must also be reviewed periodically to ensure that the measures remain relevant as organizational priorities evolve. Together, these concepts demonstrate how performance measurement allows purchasing and supply chain managers to monitor performance, support strategic objectives, and continuously improve supply chain outcomes.